Hi, I'm Tanja Hayes. Let's learn some economics. Today we are going to talk about production and costs, and specifically how to figure out the cost curves. Ooh la la. And the reason why we care about these costs are we are imagining that we are some sort of company, whether it's a big corporation or just a mom and pop thing or one person selling something. The whole point of owning an organization like that, a firm, a company, is to make some sort of money. And so we are going to be looking later on at the revenue side of things, meaning we're taking in money. And we need to look at the cost side of things because then we can calculate the profit, because profit you get by taking the revenue, subtract off the costs. So what's the deal with the costs? That's what we're going to learn today. So we are going to use an example of, imagine that we have a food truck where we're selling Swedish pancakes. Coincidentally, not at all because I'm from Sweden. But anyway, so we have this little food truck and we're making Swedish pancakes, and there's a certain size of the truck and there's a never-ending line, you know. And so let's kind of picture that. And so we have two types of cost. One is called the fixed costs, and those are the ones that you have to pay no matter how much you actually produce and sell. So you have to pay these costs no matter what. So in the food truck example, maybe we're leasing this food truck. So every month we have to send that money to the bank. Also, we might have monthly ads that we're paying or something. So that's also something that whether we're selling a lot or a little or anything at all, we have to pay these costs. So we've got those fixed costs. And then we also have variable costs, and those are the ones that vary with how much we produce. So the more pancakes we're making, what are we using more of? Ingredients, maybe forks that we're using to give out these pancakes and all that kind of stuff. So we have fixed costs and we have the variable costs. And when we add those together, we get our total cost. So fixed plus variable equals our total cost. Okay. Now what we're going to do is we're going to break it down into per item. So how much is it costing us per item to produce something? Because we're going to get the revenue per item in terms of the price we're selling them for, so we want the cost per item. So what we're going to do is we're going to divide all this by the quantity, so we're getting the cost per item. So if we took the fixed cost divided by the quantity, that's going to give us the average fixed cost. Same thing with the average variable cost, and adding all that together, we get our average total cost. So we're just dividing all of these by the quantity to get averages. Okay, so another way to kind of abbreviate, because we love to abbreviate in economics, is we have our fixed cost divided by quantity. That's going to be our average fixed cost, AFC. We don't care too much about that one, but we needed to kind of figure some other stuff out. And then our variable cost divided by quantity, that's our average variable cost. And when we add those together, we get our average total cost, which represents how much is it costing per unit to make our items. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to graph all this. So we are going to make a diagram with quantity on our x-axis. So the quantity of items that we are producing and selling, so how many pancakes are we selling? And then up here we're going to have our costs. Later we'll be adding revenue as well, so I'm just going to call it dollars up on our y-axis. All right. So let's start by looking at or thinking about the average fixed cost. What does that mean? We have a fixed cost, so we're paying a certain amount for our truck per month. And then the average means we're dividing by the number of units. So we have a huge number. At first, we're dividing by something little, so it's still huge. But as we keep dividing by bigger and bigger numbers, that average fixed cost is just going to go down, 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 down. We don't really want to graph that, but let's keep that in mind. And then we are going to have our average variable cost, which is then all going to add up to the total. So the average total cost actually looks like a smiley mouth. That's our average total cost. And that is because in the beginning, we're averaging out this huge fixed cost over all the quantity. So that brings the average total cost down. And then once we have produced a bunch of units, we start running into this idea of the more workers we're adding, the more we can produce, but each extra worker can only produce a little bit extra because it's starting to get overcrowded. We only have so many other resources. So then, even though we have to pay them the same amount per worker and they're producing less and less per person, those average costs start going up because of that. So that's why we're seeing the down and then the up like a smiley mouth. And as mentioned before, the average fixed cost just keeps going down and down, which means the average variable cost, if they're going to add up, has to get closer and closer to it. So the average variable cost is going to be below the average total cost. Same kind of shape, but getting closer and closer to it. So there's our average variable cost. Now there's one more thing that we need to add on to this in order to be able to figure out some math later on about revenues and stuff, and that is what's called the marginal cost. So many words. So marginal in economics means extra or additional. So marginal cost means to produce one more unit, how much extra is it going to cost us? So remember, as we add more and more people and they're making more and more pancakes, we have to pay each worker the same amount, yet because of overcrowding and stuff, each one can only produce a little bit extra and a little bit less than that extra and so on. So the extra cost per pancake is actually going up because we're paying those workers the same per person. So the cost curve, the marginal cost curve is basically upward sloping. And then the connection between a marginal and an average is that the marginal is always going to pull the average. So if the marginal is below the average, it's going to pull it down. If it's above the average, it's going to pull it up. And we can think of an example of our GPA, for example. Let's say you had a 3.0 GPA, so B average, and now you get an A. That's going to pull up your average because that new grade is higher than your average. So the marginal is above the average, it's going to pull it up. Or if you got a C, which is worth 2 points, that's going to pull down your 3.0 GPA. So the marginal is going to pull it up or pull it down. And so the only way that that makes sense is for the marginal to cut through these curves at their very minimum. First they're pulling them down and then they're pulling them up. So if we find kind of the minimum points of these two average curves, and then we add this marginal cost curve, which it goes down a little bit in the beginning, but then it's upward sloping. So it basically looks like a check mark going through those average cost curves at their minimum points. And here is our marginal cost. So redrawing all these curves and putting the proper words to them, here is where we end up. These are the cost curves that we need to know and need to be able to use. So average total cost, we can start with that one, little smiley mouth. Average variable cost, similar shape, but it gets closer and closer to that average total cost. And then we add that marginal cost, which looks like a check mark, basically mostly upward sloping. And it intersects both of these average cost curves at their minimum points. And so that's what we need to use for some other stuff. But that's everything for now. See you later.